Now at 6 o'clock, the BBC News with Sophie Rayworth.
I invite you all to join this government of service in the mission of national renewal. Our work is urgent, and we begin it today. Thank you very much.
The UK's new Prime Minister, his message to the country as Labour wins a landslide victory in the general election. Sir Keir Starmer and his wife Victoria are cheered by supporters as they arrive here in Downing Street. His new cabinet will meet for the first time tomorrow. A night of pain for the Conservatives. They lost more than 250 seats. Rishi Sunak is to step down as party leader, but not immediately.
I am sorry. I have given this job my all. But you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change.
Several high-profile Conservative casualties, including the former Prime Minister Liz Truss. They are all gone. An emotional night for the Scottish National Party as they suffer their worst results since 2010, losing dozens of seats. But celebrations and a complete turnaround for the Liberal Democrats. They become the third largest party at Westminster. Nigel Farage's party Reform UK received 4 million votes. Now, after 8 attempts, he is finally heading to Westminster.
And on BBC London, after Labour's landslide election win and a London MP leading the next government, we'll have the latest on the capital's winners and losers.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6, live from a very wet Downing Street, where the UK's new Prime Minister is tonight hard at work shaping the team that he wants around him, the people he hopes can deliver the change that he has promised. Labour has won an historic victory in the general election. The Conservatives suffered their worst ever defeat in their near 200-year history. Speaking outside Downing Street, the new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has promised to build a government of service and pledged to restore trust in politics. Out of 650 possible seats so far, Labour has taken 412. The Conservatives have been left with just 121. The Liberal Democrats had their best result in more than a century with 71 MPs, but a terrible night for the SNP, who went from 47 seats to just 9. History is made as Sinn Féin becomes the biggest party from Northern Ireland with 7 seats. Reform UK has taken 5 seats, while the Greens and Plaid Cymru all have 4 MPs each. Independents and others make up the remaining, and there is 1 seat, Inverness, which is still left to declare. Well, Labour's victory is largely on the back of a dramatic decline in support for the Conservatives. Back in 2019, much of the UK was a sea of blue Tory seats, but now so many have changed hands. Well, I'm joined here in Downing Street by our political editor, Chris Mason, who has been following it all through the night. And what an extraordinary night, an extraordinary day, a huge change.
Huge change after a decade of huge change, because we had the Scottish independence referendum, didn't we? We had those Conservative governments with small majorities. We had the Brexit referendum. We had Boris Johnson's landslide victory of 5 years ago, and then this. And yet, underlying that change actually is a pattern of stability as far as the parties that have spent considerable periods of time in Downing Street. It's only the 4th time today since 1979 that we've seen a transition of power from Conservative to Labour or Labour to the Conservatives. 1979, 1997, 2010 and now 2024. So yeah, quite the day and quite the change.
Just look at our new Prime Minister's face, undisguised joy. Sir Keir Starmer and his wife Victoria arrive in their new street. to be greeted by flag-waving Labour activists.
It is 27 years since we have witnessed a moment like this. Labour winning from opposition and assuming power. Labour very good at losing elections. This is one that bucks the trend. They've won, and won big.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation. I want to thank the outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. His achievement as the first British Asian Prime Minister of our country, the extra effort that will have required, should not be underestimated by anyone. But now our country has voted decisively for change, whether you voted Labour or not. In fact, especially if you did not, I say to you directly, my government will serve you.
But hang on, he admitted.
Changing a country is not like flicking a switch. The world is now a more volatile place. This will take a while. But have no doubt that the work of change begins immediately.
And he promised
to restore service and respect to politics, end the era of noisy performance, tread more lightly on your lives, and unite our country.
Jubilation, yes, but with terms and conditions. The slogan may have been change, but he admits it will take time.
So Keir Starmer entering 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister for the very first time.
And with that, the business of governing begins. Arriving this afternoon to join the Cabinet, the new Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, the first woman to be Chancellor ever, Rachel Reeves, and the new Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. All of this began to unfold at 10 o'clock last night.
Blimey, just take a look and take in those numbers.
A nocturnal political earthquake. Massive Labour gains in England, Scotland and Wales. Colossal Conservative losses. Just look at their faces. In Norfolk, a former Prime Minister became a former MP. The Conservative Party chairman Richard Holden had a nervous wait and won by just 20 votes. The former Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg wasn't so lucky and lost.
Thank you very much to everybody, and good night.
The Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey couldn't resist a spot of dad dancing to mark his party's leap forward to 71 MPs. The Scottish National Party lost 38 seats and is left with just 9. Reform UK got more votes than the Liberal Democrats but ended up with just 5 MPs. One of them, Nigel Farage, and the Green Party of England and Wales won 4 seats. Among their victors, co-leader Carla Denyer beating a Labour frontbencher in the process.
Bristol, you made history today.
Back in Westminster, it's just over 6 weeks since I last got soaked in Downing Street when the election campaign began.
Here it comes. It's going to be a busy morning for the lectern.
So there was a splash of déjà vu as well as rain there this morning as Rishi Sunak left.
To the country, I would like to say first and foremost, I am sorry. I have given this job my all, but you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters. I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss.
He offered these words about Keir Starmer.
Whatever our disagreements in this campaign, he is a decent, public-spirited man who I respect.
And these were his last public remarks in high office.
This is a difficult day, at the end of a number of difficult days. But I leave this job honoured to have been your Prime Minister. This is the best country in the world, and it is thanks entirely to you, the British people, the true source of all our achievements, our strengths, and our greatness. Thank you.
In truth, he'd tried everything to revive Conservative fortunes, but had failed, leading his party to catastrophic defeat.
Sir Keir Starmer, Your Majesty.
Your Majesty.
And so, leading to this moment.
We're having to get to grips with everything.
As Keir Starmer gets used to regal small talk, and the country gets used to its fourth Prime Minister in under 2 years. Chris Mason, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the polls had pointed to a significant Labour victory, but still the scale of the Conservative losses shocked many supporters. As we heard, some of the biggest figures in the party, including Liz Truss, Penny Mordaunt and Jacob Rees-Mogg, all lost their seats. And the inquest has begun into why the Tory vote collapsed. Some MPs have criticised the campaign, while the former Welsh Secretary, who lost his seat, said astonishing ill-discipline within the party played a part. Joe Pike reports now on the Conservatives' worst ever defeat.
So candidates, please, to join me on the stage.
The post-mortem started pre-dawn.
As a party, the Conservatives must come back together, look deep in our political souls and ask some uncomfortable questions.
As one catastrophic Conservative campaign concluded, another battle began.
Do you plan to stand for leader, Kemi?
The search for a successor.
Is it time for a new job?
Former Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch is tipped to run, as is ex-Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick.
Congratulations, Robert. Good luck in your leadership bid, which will no doubt be coming up soon.
Other possibilities include centrist Tom Tugendhat and further to the right, 3 ex-Home Secretaries, James Cleverly,
well, good morning, everybody.
Priti Patel and Suella Braverman.
And we need to learn our lesson.
But only survivors can stand. And amongst the night's record 12 cabinet casualties,
the Conservative Party candidate, 13,715.
Were likely leadership contenders Penny Mordaunt and Grant Shapps.
We've tried the patience of traditional Conservative voters with a propensity to create an endless political soap opera.
Others among the 250 Tories dumped by voters include a big Brexiteer.
From the ashes of disaster grow the roses of success.
And the UK's shortest-serving PM. But in an unexpected win, Jeremy Hunt held on. He moved out of number 11 Downing Street with his family hours after. Conservatives returning here know they've lost voters in multiple directions. But it is one rival, Reform UK, which has caused particular problems. After decades of Tory splits on Europe, many had assumed that achieving Brexit would consign Nigel Farage to history. Instead, he'll be in Parliament, sitting a few metres away. The new leader will need to decide whether to bring him close or keep their distance. Rishi Sunak has resigned as PM, but remains Conservative leader for now.
Big boots to fill, lad.
First elected just 9 years ago, he rose rapidly.
You will not face this alone.
Becoming a national name during the pandemic, but fined during Partygate. He resigned as Chancellor after tensions with Boris Johnson.
Your own economic advisor has said that would lead to mortgage rates, interest rates going up.
Lost to Liz Truss in the leadership race, but ended up in office after her administration imploded. He'd claim his legacy is financial stability. Others would argue it's leading an election campaign of historically disastrous proportions, which has left his party now searching for their 5th leader in 5 years. Joe Pike, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, one of the most dramatic Tory losses of the night was the seat of the former Prime Minister, Liz Truss. She had a majority of more than 26,000 in a rock-solid Tory seat in Norfolk. But look at this chart. She lost to Labour by just 630 votes. Afterwards, Liz Truss, who oversaw the mini-budget that spooked the markets, accepted some responsibility for the Tories' plight. Ros Atkins was at her constituency count.
Outside Liz Truss's constituency office, a clean-up was underway this morning. For those inside, there's a political mess that will take longer to fix. South West Norfolk has elected a Tory MP for decades. Not anymore. At the count in King's Lynn, rumours swirl that this time was different. It was.
We have received a strong indication that Liz Truss has lost. For the last few hours, the Labour Party has been telling us they believe they're in a strong position.
They're slow hand clapping, apparently. They're in King's Lynn. If we can bring it up, there we go. And that must be for the candidate who is not on the stage, and that would be the former Prime Minister, Liz Truss.
She's here.
I do hereby declare that Jeremy Terry is duly elected.
There would be no concession speech, but there was a brief explanation of how this happened.
I think the issue we've faced as Conservatives is we haven't delivered sufficiently on the policies people want.
But do you accept that first as a cabinet minister and then for a brief time as Prime Minister, you were part of the people in power who were overseeing those things not being delivered?
I agree I was part of that. That's absolutely true.
Was there a message to Tory voters who'd lost faith? Liz Truss declined to say.
I've already answered your questions. Thank you very much.
It was time for goodbye to her colleagues and, for now, her political career.
Just one last opportunity to ask for a message to the Conservative voters, because I think they would like to hear from you.
From Prime Minister to losing her seat in 2 years. A damning judgment on a politician and a party delivered by voters who reached their breaking point. Ros Atkins, BBC News.
Well, in Scotland, Labour stormed to victory, completely overturning the Scottish National Party's 2019 majority. If you take a look at the result from then, Scotland was dominated by SNP Yellow, with only one Labour seat in Edinburgh South. But now, the picture could not be more different. The Central Belt has turned almost completely red, with Labour gaining 36 seats and the SNP reduced to just 9, with 1 seat still to declare. The First Minister, John Swinney, described the result as very, very difficult and challenging. Our Scotland editor, James Cook, has the story.
In dramatic, emphatic fashion, Scottish Labour is back. They swept the board here in Glasgow, a moment for which they've waited nearly a decade.
People across Glasgow, Scotland and the UK have voted for change.
As the clock ticked past midnight, it slowly dawned on the SNP. This was not just a bad dream, it was a nightmare.
Look, there's no doubt this has been a very difficult election and the SNP has some serious questions to answer.
What are they?
Well, I think we need to reflect on the fact that during this campaign, the biggest concern of voters was the cost of living crisis. And unfortunately, when voters were concerned about the cost of living crisis, all they were hearing was discussion about luxury camper vans and iPads.
A reference to 2 very different investigations into SNP finances and an MSP's expenses. And for the leader, questions about his focus on independence.
I want to make it clear that I take full responsibility for the Scottish National Party campaign and the outcome that has been achieved. That is what leadership is about. You plan your campaign and you take responsibility for it when it's completed.
Dawn brought more than a splash of red to Clydeside. At the last election, Labour had just 1 Scottish MP. Now, we need a wide-angle lens to fit them all in.
Let me be really clear, the vote last night was not about independence. And I say directly to people who may have voted SNP in the past, may have voted independence in the past, may even think about voting independence at some point in the future. I want to deliver change for you. Now, I don't support independence, I don't support a referendum, but I recognise people demand change.
Labour's winning election message was that it could deliver change. Across the UK, it might have 5 years or so to prove to voters that it can deliver it. But here in Scotland, there's a more urgent deadline. The Scottish parliamentary elections are just 2 years away. The problem is, it may need to win that election before it can even tackle some of the country's biggest concerns.
Educational attainment gap is widening, health outcomes are weak, child poverty is stubbornly high. All of these things show that we're not progressing as a society, and that's the job for the Labour Party now, to fix that.
There was a consolation prize for the SNP, who unseated the Scottish Conservative leader, who'd announced his resignation in the middle of the campaign.
Obviously deeply disappointed. What we knew was going to be a risk here is a reform vote was going to allow the SNP in by the back door. And I think so far this is the highest reform vote we've seen in Scotland, almost 15%. And that's a risk.
The SNP had got used to winning. It's painfully obvious how much losing hurts. James Cook, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, Labour was also successful in winning back so-called red wall seats in its former heartlands. The seats were mainly in areas which had voted Leave in the EU referendum and voted Conservative in 2019. One of those was Grimsby, which turned blue 5 years ago for the first time since the Second World War, but has returned to Labour. From Grimsby, Ed Thomas reports.
The red wall is being rebuilt.
Grimsby's gone red again.
Labour, get in. Thank God. Let's hope they can save the NHS, if nothing else.
But still,
it's been scandal after scandal after scandal. Who else could we vote for?
And Grimsby's challenges, deprivation, inequality, are now Labour's to solve.
30, 50 and 84.
But a win is a win. This is Leanne's place, a baby bank, food bank and subsidised bingo. She's seeing more and more in need.
This country isn't the country that it used to be.
She voted Labour, but only just.
How committed are you to Labour?
I voted for him. I'm not particularly committed to him. It was a tactical vote to get the others out.
Simple as that?
Simple as that.
Labour's to-do list can be found here. The cost of living still hurts. 1 in 4 commercial premises are empty in Grimsby. Many feel let down.
Every time there's a vote on or something, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to change this, they're going to change that. What's happening? Nothing.
Like elsewhere, more than 1 in 2 people here who could vote didn't.
Did you vote?
No.
I've been a Labour man all my life. Trade unionist, working class.
There's no point in me voting. This town's gone downhill.
I didn't vote because I'm very disillusioned. All right, bud, thank you.
Labour faces new pressures. Reform came second in Grimsby. Butchers Gary and his son Lee have found a new political home.
I like Nigel Farage. I don't think the others have got the balls to do anything about what's happening in the country.
Your number one issue this election?
I'd say it's immigration.
I think there'll be more and more people voting for reform. If nothing changes, that's what will happen, I think.
But change has come.
It's got to be better than it has been. For my whole family, we have to now be hopeful going forward. Otherwise, what's the point?
Stood tall, went in, voted for what I thought was right.
And Grace is 18. She voted Labour in her very first election.
I'm feeling very hopeful. I'm hoping that it's a new path, new direction. Hopefully, it's going to be a bit better.
That hope is that promises made are promises kept. Ed Thomas, BBC News, Grimsby.
Well, the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, has been celebrating his party's best results for more than 100 years after a campaign of eye-catching stunts. At the last election in 2019, they won only 11 seats. Now, though, they have 71. The party's success has followed a decision to focus resources on target seats, mostly held by the Conservatives, many in the southwest of England. Our political correspondent Hannah Miller reports now from Maidenhead, the seat of the former Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May, which is now in the hands of the Liberal Democrats.
A series of historic wins that felt as the Liberal Democrats won 71 seats, even more than they managed before going into coalition.
Our best results for over 100 years.
Ed Davey rebuilding the party to become the third biggest in Parliament.
Trust is a very precious commodity. It's hard won. And sometimes you've lost it, you lose it. And you have to work very hard to win it back.
The party took a swathe of seats across the southwest, including Cheltenham, where they defeated Justice Secretary Alex Chalk, and Tunbridge Wells in Kent, which has been Conservative ever since its creation in 1974. There are two main factors in the Liberal Democrats' success: the crumbling of the Conservative vote in heartlands like here in Maidenhead, but also the party's own laser-like focus on places where it had previously come second. Their national vote share is barely changed compared to 2019, but the Liberal Democrats stacked up votes in key target areas. While people may have laughed at the stunts, behind the scenes there was a serious strategy. How long has this been in the making?
Well, we've been working in Maidenhead for a long time now. We took control of the council last year. We've been working since 2019 to really cement ourselves in the community so residents know that we are those local champions.
At the village hall, Kate told us why she supported the Lib Dems.
I used to vote Conservative, and I'm just so disappointed, really, in them that it's time for change.
And Samira said it was her first time voting for them in a general election. Do you feel like the Conservatives lost here, or did the Liberal Democrats win?
I think Liberal Dem, they won. Most of us were looking forward for the Liberal Dem to do what they should do for the community.
While there's much to celebrate for the Lib Dems, they now have plenty to prove if they want their gains to be a spectacle that lasts for more than a moment. Hannah Miller, BBC News, Maidenhead.
Well, celebrations too for Reform UK. They have won 5 seats, one going to its party leader, Nigel Farage, who finally enters the Commons as an MP on his 8th attempt. He has promised his party will stun everyone. During a speech this afternoon, which was interrupted by several hecklers, Mr Farage said he was going to professionalise Reform UK. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning reports on the rise of Reform.
Hello, how are you?
Nigel Farage took himself off for a celebratory lunch in London, finally making it as an MP, and not his party's only one.
Do you feel a bit guilty that you've taken so many votes from the Tory party and let Labour have this landslide?
No, they would have lost anyway.
How should a bruised Tory party deal with you now you've got 4 MPs?
I don't really care. They can do what they like. They'll fight amongst themselves, as they've done for the last 4 years. I'm not bothered about them at all.
Successfully squeezing the Conservative support.
Third in the share of vote, third in the number of votes, but not matched by the number of seats, something Mr Farage has an issue with.
Reform UK's MPs arrived today at Westminster, but first had to deal with more than half a dozen hecklers.
Nigel, you're a racist. The party's filled with racists as well.
Well, this is good preparation for the House of Commons, I suppose, isn't it? We may be too few in number to necessarily be thought of as the opposition in the House of Commons, but let me promise you something. We are going to be the opposition around the country.
I am now going to declare the result.
Early morning before the sun rose in Clacton, the rise of Nigel Farage.
Farage Nigel Paul, Reform UK, 21,225.
The smile said it all. He's helped wipe out the Tories, but now he wants more.
We will now be targeting Labour votes. We're coming for Labour, be in no doubt about that. Believe me, folks, this is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you.
Earlier, he'd gathered with supporters at a restaurant by Clacton Pier and celebrated their first win, Lee Anderson in Ashfield. 4 MPs have this evening just become 5, with a late result in South Basildon and East Thurrock. Now Westminster must prepare for the arrival of Nigel Farage. One of his MPs said there would be fireworks. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Well, the numbers in this election are very interesting. Labour have managed to win a landslide without a significant increase in their vote share. The Liberal Democrats, too, have clocked up seats with just a small rise in vote share. But the opposite has been the case for Reform UK. Their share of the vote was higher than the Liberal Democrats, but they have only 5 seats to show for it. Well, Rita Chakrabarti can tell us why. Rita.
Sophie, thank you. Let's take a look at turnout first. And despite some of the huge figures overnight, turnout was actually significantly down. Overall, across the UK, just 60% of voters came out to have their say. And as you can see, compared to 5 years ago, that's the dotted line there, the grey one, that is down 7.6%. And if you look back historically, it's much lower than it used to be in the 80s and in the 90s. So a landslide Labour victory, but the party's vote share tells a more nuanced story. So compared to 2019, it's up less than 2%. And the Lib Dems over here are up even less. But they've both achieved their huge successes because of the plummeting in the Conservative vote, down just shy of 20%. And let's not forget Reform, the major beneficiaries of that fall in terms of vote share. There they are, but not in terms of seats, and that's because of the first past the post system. So let's break down the vote share in terms of the nations. This is how England looked, with the Labour vote barely up by 1 percentage point and the Conservatives down 21%, doing desperately badly. But a different story for Reform and also actually for the Greens, who had a good night. Let's take a look now at Wales, where the Labour vote share again was notably down, but that didn't stop them from gaining 9 seats. Again, that's because of the electoral system and mainly because the Conservatives did so badly. Let's take a look at Scotland, where it is a completely different picture. A major surge by Labour, up 17%, and that's at huge cost to the SNP, down 15%, and they appear to have been severely damaged by recent events. In Northern Ireland, the main political parties aren't in play, but overall Sinn Féin have overtaken the DUP in terms of vote share and also in terms of seats, but they won't take them up at Westminster. Sophie.
Rita, thank you. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has become the UK's 7th Labour Prime Minister. His rise to the top of British politics began in 2015 when he was first elected to Parliament when he was in his mid-50s, following a career in law. Our deputy political editor, Vicky Young, looks at how the new Prime Minister has risen quickly through the political ranks to secure victory for Labour.
When you're named after the first leader of the Labour Party, maybe a political career is inevitable. But Keir Starmer didn't take a direct route to number 10. His story began in Surrey, where he lived with his parents, a nurse and a toolmaker, and his 3 siblings. He went to Reigate Grammar. When it became a private school, he stayed on a bursary. He was musical, playing the flute, piano and violin. He later gained law degrees from Leeds and Oxford universities and became a barrister specialising in human rights. In the 80s, he spoke about the laws restricting acid house parties.
The police must limit themselves to those powers and not go beyond it.
Friends from those days were among the crowd in Downing Street today. One recalls Keir Starmer's immense capacity for work and study.
What people don't see is, or are those quiet moments in private where he's incredibly engaging, incredibly fun. But when it comes to work, I think it's fair to say he takes it very, very seriously.
One way he's always relaxed is football. His passion for the game as player and Arsenal fan continues today.
I'm a massive football fan, and one of my boyhood memories is 5 o'clock sports report. Remember that?
In 2008, he became Director of Public Prosecutions, overseeing high-profile cases like MPs' expenses. And then, having joined the Labour Party in his teens, came a relatively late entrance into politics, elected to the Commons at the age of 52.
Do you want to be Prime Minister?
I'm not going to fall into
that.
What? It'd be like asking me whether I want to play for England. My son said to me the other day, shall I play for Arsenal or Chelsea when I grow up? I mean, that kind of conversation, I think, is that helpful.
He was passionately opposed to Brexit and argued for a second referendum. When Jeremy Corbyn was re-elected as Labour leader, Keir Starmer took a job when many of his colleagues refused. But he later showed a ruthless streak when he suspended his predecessor from the party over anti-Semitism. He's spoken often of his admiration for the NHS, clapping for carers with his wife during COVID. But it was his mother's attitude to her lifelong illness that taught him a lesson for life. He recently recalled her bravery the day she had an operation to amputate her leg.
She just said to me, Keir, I hope they don't cut the wrong blooming leg off. A bit of me thinks if my mum can go into that operation with that frame of mind, I ought to be able to get up and do whatever it is I've got to do.
And that's the attitude his friends say he'll bring to the enormous task ahead of him now. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, it has been a very busy afternoon in this very famous street, a very wet evening here as well, as I'm sure you can see. But Sir Keir Starmer is behind the black door here in Downing Street right now. He's set to work immediately, appointing a new cabinet, the ministers to run the government departments. Angela Rayner has been confirmed as Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. Rachel Reeves, who, as expected, becomes the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, the first woman in UK history to hold the top job at the Treasury. And David Lammy will now lead the Foreign Office as the new Foreign Secretary. Yvette Cooper has been appointed as Home Secretary. Her husband, Ed Balls, of course, was a minister when Labour was last in power. Well, the new Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, will be moving in next door to number 11 Downing Street, and our economics editor, Faisal Islam, is here with me now. You spoke to Rachel Reeves in the early hours of this morning. What she said to you, there's not a huge amount of money. She has a huge challenge ahead, doesn't she?
She does. She'll be settling into work at the Treasury with a big economic in-tray. You have crumbling council finances, you have bankrupt universities, you have worries about infrastructure investment, and you have this sort of low, anemic, sluggish rate of growth that this new government say it's one of their missions, not just to jumpstart that growth, but to make it the highest growth of all the G7 advanced nations. Not just because that's what they want, because they need it. They need it to try and loosen some of the constraints on public spending, constraints that, as you say, she was quite candid to me about earlier this morning.
Faisal, thank you. Well, the political landscape has changed right across the UK. In Northern Ireland, Sinn Féin won the most seats for the first time ever in a general election. The Nationalist Party believes in a united Ireland and doesn't take its seats at Westminster. We'll hear what that might mean for the future of Northern Ireland from Sarah Girvin in a moment. But first, let's head to Wales, where the Conservatives suffered a total wipeout. In 2019, they managed to win 12 seats, making big gains in Brexit voting areas, particularly in the northeast of Wales. But last night, every inch of blue was erased from the map. Labour won 27 of the 32 seats, with Plaid Cymru and the Liberal Democrats taking the rest. Here's our Welsh correspondent, Hal Griffith.
A red letter day for Monmouth, now back in Labour's colours for the first time in almost 20 years. It's people persuaded just about by their message.
Well, I don't want to go with the political thing of we needed a change, but we needed a change.
Met up with family yesterday and they all had the same opinion. They may have voted Conservative in the past, but yesterday the three of us as groups voted Labour.
No wonder the party wanted to come here to celebrate, even if success depends on how you frame things. Its share of the vote in Wales was actually down, the number of Labour voters the lowest since 1935.
There are lots of lessons for us in the result, and the scale of the victory does give us a special responsibility. But I found on the doorstep that as well as a real thirst for change, there's an honesty about the length of time it'll take to put right the last 14 years.
It is the end of an era for the Conservatives here. Former Welsh secretaries all lost their seats in what was a total Tory wipeout.
People were telling us what they felt about some of the antics and shenanigans that had gone on over the last 5 years in Westminster, and that turned people off from voting Conservative.
So the tide has turned in Wales, and not just for the bigger parties. Look beneath the surface and you'll also see a swell of support for reform in Wales. Not enough to claim any MPs this time, but they will have an eye on the Senedd elections just around the corner.
Plaid too says it's heading in the right direction after claiming 4 MPs.
We're looking forward already to the 2026 Senedd election, when we are now clearly the strongest challengers to Labour.
Plenty of work ahead, but for now the Welsh map is mostly painted red. Hywel Griffith, BBC News.
With just 18 seats up for grabs in Northern Ireland, every win and every loss matters. By holding its 7 seats, Nationalist Sinn Féin has become Northern Ireland's biggest party at Westminster for the first time. It doesn't take its seats in the House of Commons because it doesn't think Westminster should make decisions for Northern Ireland. It wants a united Ireland.
I think the fact that we are now the largest party of local government, the largest party of the Assembly,
and the largest party of Westminster speaks to the fact that I think that it's time for change. It's time for us to be able to take control of our own fortunes here at home. So I look forward to the journey that we have ahead in terms of having a constitutional change conversation.
It was a bad night for the Democratic Unionist Party, which suffered significant losses, none bigger than in North Antrim, where Ian Paisley lost a constituency his family has held for more than 50 years, a political earthquake. DUP leader Gavin Robinson held his seat, but warned about votes being split between different Unionist parties.
I think in constituencies right across Northern Ireland you can see the consequences of divided unionism. I think you can see that there are constituencies within Northern Ireland for which there isn't the luxury in a first-past-the-post election to shop around.
The Alliance Party, which doesn't identify as unionist or nationalist, took the seat held by the DUP's former leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, since 1997. As the shockwaves of this election settle, there is much to consider. But with Sinn Féin in the top spot and the DUP bruised, calls for a conversation about an Irish unity referendum are likely to grow louder. Sarah Gervin, BBC News.
Well, one feature of this election has been a rise in support for independent candidates not aligned to any political party. Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour leader, stood as an independent and won in Islington North. Elsewhere, Labour lost several former strongholds to independent candidates who campaigned on pro-Gaza platforms. Jonathan Ashworth was the most senior Labour MP to lose his seat in Leicester South. From there, Anna Foster reports.
Sole traders rarely win elections. In 2019, not a single independent candidate was voted into Parliament. Now, there are 6 of them. And here in Leicester South, one, Shawkat Adam, even unseated a Labour big name. Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth should have been cushioned by a 22,000 majority.
This is for the people of Gaza.
Around 30% of the electorate here are Muslim, and most of them were staunch Labour supporters. But what they saw as the party's weak position on Gaza meant that they withdrew that support in their thousands. How much change do you think he can manage on his own?
Well, we believe in him, which is why we voted for him, and we do believe that Shawkat Adam is going to carry forward our message. He's the people's person.
Pro-Palestinian candidates toppled Labour in Dewsbury and Batley, Birmingham Perry-Barr and Blackburn. And the man who led Labour into its last 2 general election campaigns,
Jeremy Corbyn,
won Islington North as an independent.
24,000.
He was barred from standing for the party this time in a row over anti-Semitism.
They're looking for a government that on the world stage will search for peace, not war, and not allow the terrible conditions to go on that are happening in Gaza at the present time.
Even as Labour celebrates victory, there are still those it needs to win over. Anna Foster, BBC News, Leicester.
Well, the Green Party had its most successful election night ever, increasing its number of seats from 1 to 4. The party had run a targeted campaign, expanding their representation to both urban and rural seats. The party's co-leader, Carla Denyer, beat the former Shadow Culture Secretary in Bristol Central by more than 10,000 votes, with a 28% swing from Labour to Green. Our correspondent Dan Johnson reports now from Bristol.
This wasn't a set-up, but a group of drama students who spotted the Greens' co-leader and greeted her, well, like a film star.
I'm really hopeful that my generation are a bunch of people that see the potential in her and see the potential in the Greens.
It's getting famous now, it's getting popular now. I think when the next time you vote, I think she's a very high chance of actually winning.
And I hereby declare that Carla Denyer is duly elected.
Victory came promising to fund public services by raising taxes. And it was a tough urban campaign here that unseated the Shadow Culture Secretary.
Now you've got to be a Green voter with a coat like that, surely?
Yep, spotted.
Jenny used to vote Labour.
I found it extraordinarily difficult to make that choice. But nationally, I just think there are a lot of people who really feel that we need to have some Green voices in Parliament.
The other half of Green leadership was elected across England in a very different area, previously safe Conservative country in East Anglia, likewise rural North Herefordshire. And they successfully defended their seat in Brighton.
What can you realistically achieve when Labour's going to be so dominant in this Parliament?
We're not likely to be able to get many laws passed ourselves directly, but I think you will see the fingerprints of a small group of Green MPs in hopefully a Labour Party that is taking a slightly more progressive approach to running the country than they would have done without us there.
A radically recoloured political landscape now looks more green. Dan Johnson, BBC News, Bristol.
Well, it has finally just about stopped raining here in Downing Street. Chris Mason, our political editor, is back with me. You still actually haven't been to bed since yesterday sometime, have you? You are still going. The next few hours, days for the new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. He's going to hit the ground running. He already has, hasn't he?
Absolutely. So this afternoon he addressed an all-staff meeting of people who work in Number 10, civil servants who are in there. So that happened first. Then, of course, there was all of the appointments to Cabinet. He has spoken in the last hour or so to President Biden. Been a conversation between the two of them, reaffirmation of the special relationship, which is the label so often used about the relationship between London and Washington. The two men will meet at a NATO summit in Washington next week. And then there'll be a Cabinet meeting coming up tomorrow morning. No doubt further appointments to the government as well at more junior ranks, as well as all of the security briefings that a new Prime Minister will get. So he'll be sleep deprived too and exhausted off the back of the campaigning of the last 6 weeks. But as always happens, new Prime Minister straight in there, straight down to business.
And what about the Conservatives? I mean, a brutal night for them. We saw Liz Truss lose her seat. We saw Rishi Sunak leaving Downing Street a short time ago. What now for them?
Utterly brutal, devastating night for them. The Conservatives are like the Formula One car of British politics. They are so often the fastest, the best, the quickest. And now, to extend that kind of motoring metaphor, the wheels are off and they're up on bricks. They are crushed, humiliated by what happened last night, and they collectively have to work out what to do amongst those of them who have been returned to Parliament. What we don't yet know is the timescale of Rishi Sunak's departure. Does he hang around a bit to give the party a bit of time to think, or is he tempted to run for the hills? He's insisted that he will do what is in the best interest of the party. The party needs to work out, though, firstly, what is in its best interest.
Chris Mason, thank you very much, and I hope you get some sleep sometime soon. Chris Fawkes, I spoke too soon. It is now raining yet again. This is July. Can you sort the weather out, please?
No, sadly I can't, Sophie. It does look like the rain's going to be here with us for some time yet to come. Mind you, it has been a slightly better day across northern portions of the UK. We've seen a bit of sunshine here in Flamborough and relatively calm seas. It won't look like this tomorrow, mind you. Take a look at the radar picture. Well, we can see some showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but this band of rain that's across more southern regions, that's more significant because it's actually going to develop into a whole new area of low pressure. That bringing us rain overnight tonight and into tomorrow, along with strengthening winds as well. Yes, the rain is here to stay for a while in London, but it becomes more extensive across England and Wales. Some heavy downpours also for Northern Ireland and Scotland through the course of the night. Rain at times probably best sums up the weather. Temperatures 6 to 13 degrees, and it will feel quite humid across East Anglia and southern counties of England overnight. That might be something you notice. Tomorrow, well, the low pressure really still with us, bringing outbreaks of rain. Could be quite heavy rain across northeast Scotland, and the wind's quite gusty for England and Wales, gusts running into the 30s of miles an hour. Gradually it turns a bit less bad, if you like, for Wales and southwest England. At least you should see some sunshine here. But those temperatures still disappointing. 15 to 18 for most, just 13 degrees in Aberdeen with a cool wind as well. Sunday, it does look like being the better of the 2 days of the weekend, but I suppose these things are all relative. After a dry start to the day, we do see showers develop quite widely, some of those becoming heavy, even a few rumbles of thunder. And the temperatures still disappointing for July. 18 in London, average for this time of the year is 24 degrees Celsius. Now, we've been reporting about the changes in the political landscape. Sadly, there are no such changes in the weather landscape. Into next week, we see further areas of low pressure, and that means we've got rain and showers coming our way for next week, with those temperatures continuing, I'm afraid, to run below average. Sophie.
I'm going to hold on to this umbrella. Chris Fawkes, thank you. Well, that is it from us in Downing Street. Clive Murray will be here just after 10 this evening. But we will leave you right now with the main images from an extraordinary night, an extraordinary day on the 2024 election. Goodbye.
We did it!
This is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you.
I've called Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him.
It was clearly a terrible night for the Conservatives.
Sir Keir Starmer, Your Majesty. Your Majesty.